City of Stevens Point Housing Task Force meeting, recorded March 23, 2022.
Let's begin then. It's 3:16. Thanks everyone for coming today. I apologize for my Zoom miss today, but I'm visiting some family over the spring break and glad that we can all be here. Our first item today, we have a presentation from James Barrett of CAP Services, the Assistant Director of Housing, to talk about some of the homeowner assistant programs that CAP provides. And so I'll bring James up and we'll hear from him.
Yep, podium please. The gauntlet, as I might refer to it. Or that's how I feel when I have to stand up there.
Right?
So.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Barrett with CAP Services, Assistant Director of Housing. I guess just maybe a quick, really brief introduction of CAP Services. Who are we? We were established in 1966 out of the creation of the Johnson administration's War on Poverty. We have about 300 employees. We run about 30 programs. We're headquartered here in Point. And we partner with other agencies, other nonprofits, and the state of Wisconsin to reach as many households as possible. So some of the funding sources that we're able to utilize are community development block grant funds, the home program, which comes out of HUD, programs like the city has, Neighbors Helping Neighbors, Central Housing Region, which is a new version of the CDBG program, and then for home buyers, we utilize Hickory funds and work with organizations like Moving Out to help people with disabilities get into homes. So I think one thing that was asked of me to come here was to talk about the homebuyer programs, and I'll probably also touch on the homeowner programs, because a big part of the home buyer program that we administer has to do with making the homes that people are interested in purchasing decent, safe, and sanitary, that's HUD's mantra for what we're doing, their goal. So I guess a general overview of the home buyer program. We encourage this home ownership through down payment closing cost assistance. And this is all based on income eligible participants. So that's a big distinction between this program and maybe other programs that are out there, like I'd say Down Payment Plus or the Affordable Home Program. Some of those have different income eligibility requirements. Ours are pretty much, it's 80% CMI, county median income. You have to be at or below that to qualify for these programs. So what that means is that it does limit the number of households we can help, because they have to be below that certain income limit. During this process of helping a prospective client purchase a home, we also try to educate as much as we can during the process. Educate them in home ownership. We require some training, actually. They have to do a home buyer, 8 hours of home buyer training, which helps them identify things like predatory lenders and maybe some other pitfalls of buying a home. In that process of helping them, we're going to start with income qualifying them. We're going to make sure they're working with a lender. We're going to take a look at what that lender is offering. We're also going to go out and do an HQS, Housing Quality Standards inspection, on the home, because one of the requirements of using this funding source is that the home meet minimum HUD code. If it doesn't, that's where we move into that housing rehabilitation part of what we do. So we'll actually take a look at what needs to be done to bring the home up to minimum HUD code, and we can exceed that as well, which we do. And we'll figure out what the potential cost, estimated cost of those measures are. And we can then actually secure funding to help pay for those costs, along with the down payment closing cost assistance that we can offer to that home buyer. So it's a more holistic approach to it. We don't just give them the money and say, there you go, good luck with that. We want to make sure that that home is in really good shape and will support them for, the next 15, 20 years, so that they don't have that 3 years in unseen calamity of my furnace broke, or my water heater blew up, or my roof started leaking. So it's kind of that try to cover as many bases as we can. The funding that we use for this program is 0% interest deferred payment loans. So it's very attractive, obviously, but it also doesn't put an undue burden on that buyer that they have to make another payment in addition to their mortgage, insurance, taxes, everything else. And because we're doing that rehab and we're bringing that house up to code, it also helps them save for the future, for the inevitability of, yes, I'll have to put a new roof on this home in 20, 25 years. It just gives them a little breathing room. The funding that we offer is typically in the form of a 30-year loan. So it's not a handout. It's equity-based, so it's a hand up. And there is some responsibility then to pay that back. So I think that also makes a more lasting impression that they understand that this isn't just a freebie. We do have some programs that offer grants, but they're for particular situations. Not everybody would qualify for that. So we have a funding source here in the city of Stevens Point that was set up a number of years ago called HOORA, which is the Home Ownership Opportunity Reserve Account. And that helps with down payment closing costs up to $5,000 to be matched with another down payment closing cost funding source. So right there, I mean, if they income qualify, that prospective buyer could get upwards of $10,000 of down payment closing cost assistance, which really bridges that gap sometimes where they're bankable. They can get the mortgage, but they just don't have that down payment set aside to cover that much. So I guess, any questions up to this point? It's a lot of info. So I guess when I was...
James,
yes.
Sorry, I had a question, James.
Sure.
The Hoorah program that you're talking about, did you say, is that the same 80% of the CMI as the other programs?
It is.
Okay.
It is. Right across the board, everything's pretty much 80%. We do have some other funding sources that might have lower targets to aim at. We just recently competed for a competitive application for the Affordable Home Program, and that's a $15,000 5-year forgivable. It's actually a grant. They still want to, the HUD still wants to put in 5-year forgivable just to put some teeth into it, but that they want 60% of our clients, they want to be 60% CMI or lower. So that's a goal that we aim for, but that isn't an automatic disqualifier if they're over 60%.
Okay, thanks. I feel like that down payment is one of the solutions or problems that a lot of people run into, is that, like you're saying, they're very bankable, but unable to put together the pool for down payment of home ownership.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
How many folks are being served through this program each year?
That's a tough number to pin down because recently one of the challenges, I'm glad you brought that up, one of our challenges, the housing market has gone ballistic right now. So I've been working at CAP for 15 years. When I started, a starter house was in that 60 to 80,000 range. Usually needed about $20,000 worth of work on average, which was a roof, some windows, maybe a furnace. Now we're looking at a starter home, 120 to 150, needing $40,000 worth of rehab work. We run up against a constraint where HUD sets a limit, a value limit every year. So they want to keep this program for affordable housing. So the value limit's $170,000. So if someone purchases or wants to purchase a home that's 150, okay, that's under the value limit. If the home needs $40,000 worth of work, now we're over the value limit. So even though the money's there, even though the applicant qualifies for the program, it doesn't mean that the home will qualify for the program. So we run into that from time to time. I guess I have some big picture numbers that I put together. Right now, CAP Services, the housing program, administers 378 loans. Now that's over our service area. And that 378 loans doesn't include loans that have been paid off, that have been satisfied. That's $3 million in loans. That's actually the city of Stevens Point alone. In our service area, it's just under 800 loans at 7.8 million. So the need's out there. We try to reach as many households as we can, but the constraints, once again, the rising cost of housing, the increasing level of deferred maintenance, where people just aren't taking care of their homes. And that can be from a number of different things. Fiscal or, liquidity, they don't have the money to do it. It might be that they just really were never educated on how to run a home. A home is like an automobile, really. It's a machine. The whole structure is a machine, and if something starts going wrong with that machine, it's going to start having catastrophic results. If they don't know what to look for, then sometimes it gets out of hand and causes even bigger problems. So if they don't notice that there's a wet spot on the second floor, then maybe they don't look up and see the wet spot on the ceiling, and now the insulation is saturated and the plaster starts falling off the ceiling and the floor starts warping, and it just goes from there. So that's another one of our, I guess, difficulties, is getting homeowners educated to take care of the largest investment of their life, really. The rehab program is very similar. We have a varied source of funding that we can utilize for that program. Income qualifications apply at CMI typically. And we, once again, deferred maintenance in that. The average cost of these projects used to be $10,000 to $20,000. Now it's $20,000 to $50,000 on average. We've had a number of projects in the past few years that have been over $80,000. So there was a lot of, just kind of a a lot of deferred maintenance, a lot of maintenance issues on the structures. Higher cost of materials is pushing this cost even higher. Lack of contractor availability is making it difficult. If we have fewer contractors, they kind of get to write their own prices. The competition just isn't there that it used to be. One of the biggest difficulties that we actually have is getting the word out. We don't have the same number of publications out there. Newspapers are going away, and so we're relying more and more on digital content, but we don't always reach everyone through an internet campaign. I know that my parents aren't on Facebook, so they would never see if there was a program available if it was put up on Facebook. So that becomes a difficulty too. We reach out to as many locations as we can, churches, grocery stores, the ADRC, any of those places where we can put flyers out, pamphlets out, information, try to educate as many people who work in those locations to refer them to us, but it's still sometimes word out, and sometimes, frankly, people don't believe it because it does seem too good to be true that we're going to offer them all of this help for very little. So, yeah.
So I got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
When you're back to your home buyer assistance, do they apply with you guys first and get approved in advance, or is this something that happens after they have an accepted offer?
So that's a very good question. And that's something that we've worked on for a long time to try to figure out the best sequence of events. Typically what we'll get is we will get a prospective buyer will contact us and say, I'm thinking about buying this house. I heard that you guys offer some assistance. And one of our first questions is, where do you live? Because with the internet, we will get people from Oklahoma or Texas or wherever saying, can you help me buy this house? The next thing that we'll ask is, are you working with a lender? What we would like to see is that they're working with a lender already, so they have a better idea of what kind of price range should I be looking at to start with, instead of, I found the house that I really want because my realtor told me that this is just the house for me. And no slam on realtors, but their job is to sell a house. And so then everything is coming after, and that makes it more difficult. If they're working with a lender, then we can establish a relationship with that lender. We can figure out, well, this is a general range that you should be looking in. Sometimes the lender will say, you're not ready. Your credit's not up to par. Maybe you've got some things that happened in the past with your credit that aren't going to work out right now, and maybe offer some credit counseling. Once we get a better idea, and maybe we'll hear from the bank and they'll say, yeah, this person is definitely bankable, so this is kind of their range. Well, then we encourage that homeowner, that home buyer, to go out and start looking for a property, identify a property. We'll go out and do an inspection on that home so that we can see, what is it going to take? Is this a property that is going to fall within that affordability range even after it needs some work? That's kind of the best case scenario. What we get sometimes is, I found this house, I really like it, but I need help. And so then we'll start to figure out if they income qualify, while also encouraging them to find a bank. And then they'll usually throw on top of that, I'd like to close at the end of the month. So, we do what we can do.
So in today's current housing climate, does does the program that you're offering put up too many roadblocks for them to actually get a house? Because I can tell you that anytime I'm submitting offers, honestly, the fewer contingencies, the better. And it sounds like you're adding a lot of contingencies. And
Right.
as a seller, they're going to pass instantly and go with the cleanest offer. And I guess my concern would be is if you're requiring additional inspections, I mean, hell, most places right now are waiving inspection contingencies, not adding them.
Exactly.
So does that create a huge roadblock to anybody getting anything at this point here? Is it just not, I mean, when I'm looking at places to buy right now, it's on the market 48 hours.
Right.
48 hours, we want offers in, we're making a decision, and cleanest offer wins. Cleanest,
Right.
highest offer wins. And so I guess, does that not jive with what's going on in the market right now with how you're doing things?
It makes it more difficult. I think one thing that we've got going for us is that we have this established track record of helping these potential buyers that would not be clients. Like, they wouldn't even get their foot in the door because we can offer these down payment closing cost assistance funds. It opens up a whole nother market. Now, if someone is buying properties for investment, it's hard for us to help this single buyer realize their goal when we do have some requirements. We have some hoops that we need to jump through, they need to jump through. We try to move as quickly as we can. I think working with real estate professionals, they understand that things take a little longer when the applicant wants to, or the potential buyer wants to work with us or needs to work with us for assistance. That's kind of all relationship building, really. But yeah, CAP Services also looks for homes that we can purchase and fix up and then sell to income qualified households. We get beat out all the time because we have to clear it with the board, and we've got these steps that we have to take, and by the time we get back, I don't even get to go in, most of the time. It's gone because it had a cash offer. So that is a difficulty.
Okay.
Yeah.
How often does the price get adjusted by HUD? And like, is that a regular thing or is it just,
Every year.
okay?
Every year, they take a look at the real estate transactions that have occurred, and they always upwardly adjust it. I've never seen them lower it. But for instance, in 2017, I think the value limit was 148. So it went from 148 to 170 in that amount of time. Now, before that, it had been moving up by fractions of thousands, maybe 500 a year. You know, it was just a very slow measured upward. Now it is taking much larger steps. And it's still not really realistic at this point. I think they still think that an affordable first-time homebuyer home is $75,000, which $75,000 won't buy much now.
Barely buys a lot.
Yeah.
Buys a lot of work.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, sorry for coming in late. I was
No,
running late
that's-
on a work meeting. And if I missed this, I'm sorry. You know, part of the reason we formed the task force was to better understand how the city can either partner with, provide support for, build zoning code that is adequate, develop policies to support. Is there anything in your mind, if there was one thing the city could do, had the power within its, in the realm of all the things that we may or may not be able to do,
Right.
what would that look like?
You know, honestly, most of our constraints or regulation, that's all federal-based.
Okay,
So, I mean, the city really can't do much to,
Okay.
to open up, to make things run more smoothly. because it's a federal thing where we have to have these ducks in a row before we can move on. Like I said early on in my presentation, it's income qualification. That's the number one thing. And getting that information from the prospective buyer, that's the toughest part of the whole process, is getting that information from them in a timely fashion so that we can keep moving and actually make this happen. We also do habitat projects. We'll provide down payment closing costs for habitat projects, and that seems to be about a every other year situation. We provide about $17,000 of down payment closing cost assistance to the prospective owner. And
The redevelopment authority, there was some money that council sent. It was income generated from the sale of lots at the Whitetail subdivision off of Highway 66. And council, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember what year that was. Maybe it was 2017 or 18. We sent over those proceeds rather than having them sit on our general ledger because council wasn't really doing anything with them at the time. We sent it over to the redevelopment authority. And it's kind of languished there to some degree. So there is money sitting there. Now it has been used for some facade grants, I believe, some demo grants.
Yeah, the Housing Trust Fund monies, facade grants have been paid for out of the downtown TIF.
Okay.
And have been reimbursed the redevelopment authority for those costs. The Housing Trust Fund, we have utilized, that's what CAP Services taps into for some of the down payment assistance. There's right now, I want to say about 650,000 in that account specifically. So a pretty sizable amount. And one of the challenges that we've had, as Mr. Barrett mentioned, is just getting the money out there and marketing the materials. That's pretty much the same money that's earmarked for like the Neighbor Helping Neighbor and
Right.
grant monies as well.
The money that came from Whitetail, yeah.
Yep, that money originated from Whitetail.
Right.
Yep.
It's just trying to figure out, I share the concerns in looking for housing. I'm in a large house, I want to downsize, and it's impossible. And I'm not, I don't have the income limitations that some folks do, so, what is the puzzle piece? That's even the lack of properties. And if Travis is having trouble finding properties, then,
I think everybody is,
yeah, everyone is. So I don't know what that,
I mean, it's out there. It's just how much do you want to pay for it?
right. And
Yeah,
how
and
much do we want to eventually pay in taxes? Because this will lift everything, and all of your investments are going to go, oops.
Yep.
So I'm just trying to figure out what those policies look like, because some of it's programs and some of it's policy.
right.
One thing that we've been trying to work with, the city has, in conjunction with CAP, is trying to get first right of refusal for
Yeah.
tax foreclosed properties.
Yeah.
And the county Supervisor Johnson has not been as
Only
amenable.
for a few more weeks,
right.
and then I'll just retain my council seat.
Hasn't been as amenable to having that discussion, mainly because there's a minimum cost that the county would like to get out of these tax
Right.
forfeiture properties, but because of the current market, they're getting above and beyond that. So it's actually a moneymaker for the county. When we're trying to work with CAP, there was a huge foreclosure a few years ago, and we had worked with CAP to identify 3-4 properties in
Yep.
that 10 that could really work, and the county opted to send everything to the full process, and we couldn't. I mean, CAP tried to bid on property, and they kept getting outbid by other folks.
So one action item could be is, of course, we'll want to wait till after April 5th, obviously, is for the city and CAP Services and maybe others to develop an approach to the county and with some policy suggestions so that, to find that win-win, they're trying to make up what they lost on taxes, right? But then when we have those vacant properties, then that nobody wants, like the house that was on 4th and Meadow, I think it was.
Yes.
I see they're finally fixing it, but in the interim, it's blight. So could one of the action items coming out of this or recommendations is we develop that approach and try to negotiate a win-win with whomever that next administration is, and then the next county board chair from a policy side.
Because of course, our end goal is affordable housing.
Right.
So when we take one of those properties on, it isn't that it's a moneymaker. It's getting an income qualified family into that home and
Right.
stabilizing the community, adding.
That's exactly
Adding to the
right.
community. So,
The city just passed, the council just passed our first ever strategic plan, and Director Kronowski was an amazing assistance on that, as was some folks from Create. But it's all focused around creating neighborhoods and creating resiliency and strength of community from the neighborhoods on up. And we can't have that if we can't get families into housing in neighborhoods.
right.
So these things are all tied, and I know that we're not unique in the country, but if we can find a few key things, a few key policy ideas that can tilt it ever so slightly, then we'll be achieving not only meeting affordable housing goals that the council has already stated, but meeting our strategic plan goals as well.
Right.
So,
And we are unique here. Stevens Point's a very unique place.
it is.
I'm an outsider, so,
And I'm not, but yes, we are unique, but, yeah, I have relatives in other parts of the country, and I'm talking about the challenges of housing, so,
absolutely. All right.
Thank you.
thank you.
Welcome. Thanks for letting me participate.
Well, Director, I'm wondering if you have something to open our discussion on goals, and the first goal that's stated.
You betcha. Okay, so, we're towards the, I don't want to call it the end, but we're starting to finalize kind of that information gathering phase for the Housing Task Force. We'll still have presentations over the next few months, but they'll be a little bit more concise, not as many like broad goals, but maybe talking about the issues with like building and the cost with supply chain issues that those folks are running into, as an example. We will start getting into the goals that we've picked up from those of you who submitted your goals and objectives over the next few meetings as well, and really start building the white paper, the report that this group has been charged with. And just again, a goals and outcome the group wishes to achieve over the long-term objective is a set specific policy recommendation in order to achieve that goal.
Music.
I'm gonna go ahead and mute you, Polly, I'm sorry. Don't normally get to mute the chair, but,
Like music from an Italian restaurant. Yeah.
so, as Alder Johnson, brought up earlier, we have recently adopted the city's strategic plan, and we now have a vision statement, which I think is a really important piece of this puzzle. The broad overview is, again, neighborhoods and establishing our neighborhoods and being certain that the future of our community is really embedded in the fabric of our neighborhoods. And as long as we provide opportunities for families and residents to reside and feel this place of comfort and investment, that we're going to be a strong community as we move forward. But the city's vision statement on the screen is that Stevens Point is a thriving community of choice that's inviting to and supportive of all people. We're grounded in creativity and innovation, or sustainability, and healthy living our way of life. People are the point is our motto, more or less. And that mission statement or that vision statement was really put together by a really solid group of individuals on the steering committee, and was heavily reviewed by a number of other groups as well. So just as we move forward, we spent a lot of time and energy and money on strategic planning, and so ensuring that that's kind of at the forefront of these conversations is an important part of that. I will say that our goals and objectives are still really fluid at this point. We're going to take kind of the first one, which we'll talk about in a moment, is this really broad objective and have these open discussions. But what I really want to emphasize as part of this is a recommendation of the city council. And the city only has so many tools in our own toolbox to address housing. Zoning, economic development, community engagement are pretty much the top three that I could think of when putting this information together. I'm certain there's more, and when I say economic development, that includes, incentives, working with CAP services, the financial impacts that we can provide as a community. There are things that we can't do, either because of state law or because it's really outside the city's purview as a municipal organization. So, I hope we're ready. Goal 1 was to diversify and expand the city's housing stock for all residents. Really broad stroke, right? I mean, really, really broad, and that's okay. And I mention this because this was brought up by Mark and a number of others, but really making sure it's everyone, the IDD community, homeless, those we learned about last month, renters, owners, everyone, and that we have housing that works for them and fits their price range. And how do we encourage this goal? And I put this photo on the bottom. This is from APA, American Planning Association. We have a lot of these great detached single-family homes, not only in Stevens Point in Wisconsin, the United States, and we have a lot of these mid-rise properties going up in the city now. But this missing middle, which is historically, at the turn of the century, you saw a lot of variation in housing options and housing stock. This is what's gone. And we've essentially regulated ourselves out of the missing middle. And regulation is because of zoning, right? So this is where I want the committee to really start diving in and providing information. Adam's here. He's going to be keeping some really detailed notes. And so as you bring things up or as you want to add to this list or subtract from it, put it out there. We've learned a lot the last few months through the presentations. I'm almost certain everybody's got an idea on how we achieve this, and there's no one defined way to achieve more housing for all residents in the city. So one of the things that this is what staff had kind of started, throwing out there was a huge issue is the definition of family. Right now, the city's definition is no more than two unrelated individuals. And if you're related by marriage, blood, or any other legal means, you're exempt from that family definition. But if you're a caretaker for someone who's is part of the IDD community, you live if there's two individuals already. Is there a way for us to better define family in the city zoning code? And we'll be looking towards St. Paul. They actually just did a huge change to their definition of family that I think is pretty inclusive. And it has been well thought out and was challenged in court, and they actually won, which is pretty incredible in and of itself. So, accessory dwelling units, increasing missing middle housing. How do we encourage that in our zoning? Use by right or permitted uses in zoning versus conditional uses, and how do we incorporate homelessness in this conversation? And before I open it up, and I promise I'll stop talking in about 30 seconds, one of the things that was brought up was how do we encourage inclusionary zoning. Unfortunately, the state of Wisconsin doesn't allow us to mandate affordable housing as part of zoning. We can require it as part of like economic development incentives, but if you do a 40-unit subdivision, we can't mandate that 10 of those 40 units are dedicated for affordable housing.
Unless we own the subdivision.
Correct. Yep, we could, if let's say the city were a developer, we could dedicate those, but if a private developer came in, we could not mandate it. So that's just one thing to think about as well. But what are other zoning goals, objectives that we should be really focusing on as city staff when we put this together and bring it back for more conversation the next round?
Ryan, this is Mike. One of the things that I wanted us to look at was the opportunity for smaller tiny home communities. And of course, ironically, you and I just talked about the potential for our own city subdivision, and it hadn't occurred to me about this. But the tiny home opportunities or the small home opportunities, I think, is something that we have not yet fully explored.
I agree.
Yeah, I would piggyback off of that, that also the opportunity to build clusters of them, both, I know we have the planned development, zoning opportunity, but what can we do within like a lot that maybe had a larger house that really should be demolished at this point, and maybe creating an opportunity to put either two smaller units that are both available to owners, or because there's kind of the question of smaller homes versus like duplex too, and what the priority is and availability is for those.
Lisa?
So the other thing, and kind of related to what Mike said and what Polly said, and you and I were on that Zoom with the students that took the two parcels and did plan development type things. And one of them was on Bragg's, in one of those vacant lots between Reserve and the other one. Anyway, that one had cottage courts. And they were single family, they weren't rentals. Those were, someone like me wanting a small little compact lot. So, I mean, that kind of fits with them. I think there's a lot of examples of that density. So I would add that to that whole list of how we want to think about zoning and where that would be most appropriate. I think the other thing is, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with ADUs, but I've been getting more people asking me or talking with me about concerns of properties being purchased for the sole purpose of Airbnb, which is basically real estate speculation. And what is that impact? I don't know if we can do anything, say.
I'll just tell you, from a state statute standpoint, you can't regulate what somebody can do with their property, and if somebody wants to purchase that.
But we can zone and say, and I know this has been done in other municipalities, say only X number of bars per whatever. We only have so many licenses, tattoo
But that does not apply to vacation rentals. State statute prohibits that.
So one thing that we've done, you're right, you can't prohibit tourist touring houses, but we can, locally, we do have zoning, and that's where you can regulate a little bit further.
Right.
Like right now, within the city, you can't operate a tourist streaming house that's non-owner occupied unless you're zone R4, R5.
Right.
So maybe this is not the avenue to get into that.
Sure.
But that seems to be, if I'm not mistaken, a direct violation of the state law. The state law specifically says that the city or municipality or an HOA or anything cannot in any way restrict your right to rent your property as long as that building is accessible to be used as a dwelling, it's accessible to be used as an Airbnb, and the municipality cannot regulate it or pick or choose zones
Sure.
that they can or can't be in.
Yeah, the regulation is based on whether or not the owner occupies the home at the time of the Airbnb rental or VRBO rental or not. And it's allowed within our zoning code to have an Airbnb or tourist rooming house. It's just, is it allowed if you reside there at the time or not? That's where we've been able to.
Why does that matter?
Because we're still in the spirit of the state statute, because we're allowing it as part of the zoning code. The occupancy, whether or not you're there or not, is how we've regulated it.
I don't know if the state statute even talks to that. The state statute just says that you have the right to rent your property.
Yeah, we're not.
It is irregardless of whether or not you live there or occupy it or not. So I guess I don't know if I see how that kind of plays into it. Maybe it's probably a scenario for a different time,
Yeah,
but.
I think there are esoteric and subtle,
Must have been Max.
yeah.
It was Max. I was going to say, Travis, did you just say irregardless?
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry.
I was so mad about about the law, didn't even hear that one, so.
My apologies.
Thanks, Mike, he should leave the room now, so. But it may be a discussion for a different time, because we're just trying to identify goals. Does this fit in this? Is there anything? And that doesn't mean we don't advocate at the state level to try and change things either.
Right. Yep.
Well, that is one of the bigger issues. Tourist rooming houses, especially in resort-esque communities, have been pushing, Door County is a really good example, you know, where you've got a lot more tourist rooming houses, and now homes that were historically used for more of that workforce to help service the tourists are being rented as Airbnbs and VRBOs, and you're pricing out, you know, those workers. You know, we have a handful of Airbnbs locally, and I don't think it's as big of an issue in Stevens Point, but we've also been more restrictive than other communities have when it came to tourist rooming houses and VRBOs.
Never say no.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. I come from the other end of it where I own them, so I'm real familiar with them and the state laws that go along with those. And I deal with a fair amount of different municipalities around the state where we've got them that have, you know, to some degree, a level of rules that you know, can or can't be a little bit more restrictive. But some of them here, I really question whether or not Stevens Point's gone too far, that it's against state code. But that's another.
I love pushing boundaries.
Well,
You know that by now.
it's fine as long as you don't mind people pushing back.
So
Never.
one of the things I've heard from getting off the VRBO stuff is, you know, the cluster, the cottage courts. Is it an issue of density? I mean, is one of the recommendations that we could make as part of the zoning component of this goal is to look at ways to increase density?
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about things like minimum setbacks, lot coverage, parking requirements, and whether or not those may inhibit cottage courts, townhomes, row houses,
Right.
other styles of housing like that, where if those are be a part of the lot, does it inhibit those from appearing?
It definitely could. I know Trevor's here, and I'm going to say parking has always been a big issue. Yeah, I know. He's jumping up and down in the back for those who can't see. No, I'm just kidding. But, you know, one thing that we've been focusing on the last several years is how do we reduce parking minimums, and how do we really address that? And one of the ways that we've done it is, okay, allowing overnight on-street parking, because roads are already liabilities. We might as well use them to our advantage, offering parking on streets overnight, and then reducing the amount of impervious surface or parking spaces required for dwellings kind of go hand in hand, because the actual land use component of it is now being better utilized as opposed to for gravel or concrete or asphalt for parking. Yeah, really good point.
I'm wondering if from Ryan or Adam's perspective too, that where you're talking about use by right, having if someone wants to build out some tiny homes or this cluster of smaller units, if there's a conditional, if right now that's in the conditional line, or if there's any hesitation for just allowing that as a permitted use, especially in like R2 or R3.
So currently, the zoning code states that anytime you have more than one principal structure on one lot, you have to go through a conditional use permit. And I'm going to preface all this by stating that our zoning code was adopted in 1979.
Thank you.
And is in desperate, dire need of a complete overhaul. We're aware of it. We're cognizant of it. We're trying to make those changes slowly. But it's definitely something as we go through the comp plan update the next several years that we're going to also be working on as a zoning code rewrite. But creating specific zoning districts, and maybe that's just one of the things that we have as a separate goal is, you know, rewrite the zoning code to make it, you know, make more housing accessible and reduce the red tape. But yeah, that's something that we need to really be looking at, whether it's form-based zoning or more creative zoning districts.
I want to circle back real quick to tiny houses. I know you guys talked about it, not knowing much about it. Easy enough. Occupy Madison is, you can Google it, go on their website. They've been doing this for years. I've visited their villages multiple times for their tiny homes. There's a lot of information on their website. So if you want to learn more about tiny homes, go ahead and check out Occupy Madison. So my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to add to what Tiffany said, as far as, looking to other communities, every community is trying to solve this. So just trying to do that search out there to see what's working, what's not, what we need to be aware of, those kind of things. Because I've got a Google alert for housing and a couple of other keywords that just try to keep track of everything that's going on that we can learn from, because it's easier that way. I'm lazy.
Sure, Trevor, yeah, join the conversation. You just can't say parking.
I didn't bring it up. Trevor Rourke, 601 Washington. Thanks for bringing up the P word, Chris. That was great.
I know it scares people.
I know it scares people. There actually is another tool that some municipalities are using. It's called Unbundling Parking. So I don't know if everyone's heard of that. Basically, developers or renters or even builders of houses, they push the cost of parking onto the user directly. So what happens is, if you have this citywide, it evens the playing field. So if someone's walking, let's say, you're now living at the North Side Yard, or a new development, or even a house or a tiny house that just popped up, you don't necessarily have to own a car. And, it greatly supports the downtown, makes the neighborhood automatically more walkable, and then it saves costs on the developer's end too. So it's another tool for the toolbox, possibly. Thanks.
So to wrap up the zoning component here, before we get on to the economic development piece, staff will come back with a more defined definition of family, if you will, as part of it. I think also, from what I'm hearing, is maybe an objective to rewrite the zoning code to identify ways to increase density, to reduce or make setbacks, development of home parcels, whether it be single family, multifamily, a little bit more relaxed through form-based zoning. And maybe one thing we just put in there that this committee recommends is just a complete overhaul and rewrite of the zoning code, which would be, I think, the right way to go anyway, so.
I'd be supportive of that.
Yeah.
Well, it almost seems necessary if we start changing some, and,
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's gonna.
Frankenstein
It's just gonna roll
instead
from
of
one to the
something
next.
else.
It's gonna be just piecemeal together
Yeah.
rather than a cohesive unit.
It's pretty much a giant
Yeah.
piece,
kind of
maybe,
like painting the living room, well, then,
Yeah.
the kitchen looks like heck, and
Yeah, that's pretty much it, so. And then look at ways to incorporate, like the Occupy Madison tiny home component as part of addressing the homelessness issue via zoning. Seem like a good direction for the group? Okay.
If you would, Ryan and Adam, as you work on the definition of family, which I think will probably be one of the more contentious issues, having a number of options that other communities did might, what it does, and it gives a little more power back to people to say, well, these are the options, and not just, this is the only option. And I think we all know that there'll be pushback on that. So I think providing the options gives it a more welcoming opportunity to make that selection.
Is there, I mean, along those lines, is there a reason that we even want to define family in this day and age? Why aren't we just going with strictly a nuts and bolts square footage per person type thing, and just going, you know what, we don't want to overcrowd houses, but why do we care how somebody makes up their family that they live within?
I would echo that comment as well. I was just thinking, I don't know why we use the term family to define humans in a household.
I guess I'm gonna put on my, the main reason that the city, and I will state, we have the most restrictive definition of family probably in the state.
We do.
I mean, like, we're number one. Put the foam finger away, it's fine. But realistically, it was as a result of the conversion of homes in the 60s and 70s and 80s from single family or two family to boarding houses. And at the time, changing the code to stop that, saying, okay, we have to make it really restrictive, no more than 2 unrelated individuals. Here are your grandfathered statuses, student rentals that have 8, 9 people living there, and here's the way that you lose that grandfathered status. And we have had a few. It hasn't been, I think, as it hasn't happened as quickly as I think the folks who adopted that thought it would. But we have had a few that were grandfathered that have lost that status and are now back to no more than 2 unrelated.
I will say that, as we look at this, as times have changed, so has the student market. I can tell you that those houses are by far less desirable anymore. Everybody's kind of coming from a generation of, you're raised with 1 or 2 siblings and you got your own room, and we find people not wanting as much to be rooming with a whole bunch of other people. They like to have their 1 and 2 bedroom apartment. Seems to be what our big demands. So I don't know if changing that or keeping students in mind for that is as big of an issue as it maybe had been in the past. Just food for thought.
Yeah, that's a good point. But that would be one of the options that maybe we bring back to the committee and say, here's the square footage, here's, if you want to just define it holistically.
Are there other communities that use that formula, do you know?
I think doesn't Whiting?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's your homework. Find some examples. Sorry.
I don't know.
I think Plover might too, don't they?
No, I think they're a certain specific, but I want to say they're 3.
Okay.
I should know that, but, it's been a few years.
You should. You weren't paying attention then, huh?
I guess not. Too busy looking at Stevens Point, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll work on that, and we'll definitely bring some information back, and the whole plan, it really is to kind of keep going back and forth until goal 1 is really solidified, and then goal 2 is almost solidified, and we're talking about goal, so, yeah, it's a living, breathing document at this point, so. Economic development, currently, we do offer TIF incentive, tax increment finance. The unwritten rule of thumb that city staff has always utilized is a 30% ratio, wherein depending on the increment that you generate, you're eligible for some TIF incentive up to 30% of that increment. Most of the time, we don't hit that. We're in that 17 to 22% range. But we have gone above and beyond that for specific projects that we think are going to be good catalysts or is something that's needed in the community. The Northside Yard project is an example of needing more housing in the downtown area. We worked with the developer pretty extensively. They were above that 30% as an example. When we look at affordable housing projects, we've been willing to push the envelope on that 30% because we know it's a need in this community as well. And when I say affordable housing projects, those would be WIDA tax credit projects. So it's all going to be income-based, and your rent is based on your income. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but careful with exclusionary zoning laws. We can't mandate, but we can encourage or require via TIF. But as a zoning component alone, we can't mandate it to a private developer.
So if we had a TIF policy related to that, we could get around the inclusionary zoning laws.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you need like a formal TIF policy, but if the 30% rule isn't a technical policy, that's just been we do have to keep that door open for
Yeah,
open
I know she's
meeting
being
stuff.
polite. That
Sorry.
was very nice of her, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's good.
Yeah, but that is one thing that, we can, because we play, partial developer in a project when we're providing financial incentives, we can require that.
Yeah.
Why don't you just let her know that it's an open meeting, so by state law, we have to keep the door open.
Yeah, that was very nice.
Thank you. But one of the objectives could be a formalized policy that does outline, going above and beyond or closer to that 30% rule for affordable or IDD housing, as an example.
I think the benefit of a policy is then staff understands the rules, developers understand the rules. I mean, I know I, as staff in my daytime job, really like policies that are clear because I know the limits of then my capabilities, what I can do. And then when I go out and work with my customers, they understand where my limits are, and it makes it clear for them. It's not just me making up stuff. So there is, and sometimes policies can be too rigid, but I think a broad enough policy to set standards so everybody knows what the rules are, I think is beneficial.
Yeah, I want to echo that. When I think about kind of what we're doing here, I think about like, what are all the reasons people are falling out, right? What are all the reasons people aren't getting into housing? And you know, in a perfect world, if we had those great metrics, we could see who's falling out, why they're falling out, and try to correct those. And I think that could be one of them, because I'm thinking about developers coming in, you know, the IDD community, a huge percentage of those are just falling out. They're not getting into homes, they're staying with their parents, they're in tough situations. And some of it could be a clear communication that if we had that perfect information, how many of the homeless are falling out, how many of the IDD are falling out, a goal could be written where it could be, you know, I don't know how we get those numbers, but here are some numbers, here's what we want to reduce them by to create a new housing plan.
Right.
And if that's clearly communicated, I think that would help in going to the people, as you mentioned.
Yeah, setting outcome standards or measures is always, because how do you know if you're being successful, right?
Yeah.
And I think the other thing related to economic development is we maybe should first kind of define what we mean by economic development, because it's, you know, there's a wide range there, so that we know we're hitting targets to meet the definition that we all commonly share. Because part of economic development is also wages, and we may not have a lot of control over that, but if that's one of the metrics where people are falling out, then at least we know a variable that we might not be able to meet some of our outcome measures based on that. So, sorry if I'm sounding like a social science policy person. So.
Well, I also think that's important, though, when we're having conversations in the community, because there's a lot of folks who don't understand that relationship. And so if they think all the answers are going to come from this one piece, right? So it's just also an education part about helping the wider community understand that connection with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the challenges that we have is the last housing study we did was in 2017, and it was more focused on market rate housing.
Right.
And there was a little paragraph in there about other options, like, you know, senior housing, IDD housing, but it was really focused on that market rate stuff. And I think that's where, and it's even dated now. I mean, it's you know, a few years old. Maybe that's one of the things that we want to look at is getting an updated study done. And really having them focus not necessarily on market rate housing, because my experience the last several years has been market rate is not an issue. It's where do we focus on for affordable and
So what does he do? He goes to close the door. Yeah.
affordable and other housing needs.
Yes, I guess I just wanted to also throw out, like, when I think of economic development, when it relates to housing, is how the community is set up, thinking about what amenities, what businesses, what cultural experiences I can go to from within walking distance of my house.
Great.
Or wherever it is that I'm renting from. Because that's what I'm thinking about when I think economic development changes, ? Is how do I go to the concert that I'm closest to? How do I go to my fitness facility? How do I go to the park that's closest to me? So thinking about that and developing the neighborhoods or spaces.
Right. I agree with that. I would also, something we may want to do to better understand, you know, when you say senior housing, it gives me the EBGBs because I'm 66. I don't want to live in a senior housing.
Yeah, well, and
Development.
the data shows that people aren't moving into housing, they're getting in-home care. I mean,
Yeah.
as opposed to, 20, 30 years ago, it was kind of nursing homes and then assisted living. That has flipped.
Right.
Right? And are we prepared for that? Because we're not prepared for all these folks who are about to age out.
Yeah. They want to live in a neighborhood, they want to have neighbors, they want to have, you know, different ages, they want to be able to talk to their neighbors, they don't, you know, when we talk about senior housing, do we know? Have we ever really evaluated what that looks like? And that could be a partnership with ADRC, and just to better understand that, because if there isn't a demand for clusters of seniors living in one place, then we can kind of carve that out and create some other focuses, so.
Yeah, because I think more folks at a certain age are looking at housing that they can live in until they die.
Yeah,
And instead bringing the care in, rather than I'm gonna leave this house and go live in
right.
Brookdale, which is not Brookdale anymore, but.
Well, one of the interesting, just quick story, was a number of folks were selling their family homes as, like in the village of Plover or in Whitetail, because they didn't need the 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom, 3,500 square foot home. And at the time, and I remember this when I came back to the area, I was competing against people who had cash offers because they already sold their house, and now they were buying the 12 to 1,400 square foot, 3-bed, 1.5 bath starter home, right?
Right.
And in Stevens Point. And so it was an interesting conundrum where people were downsizing for that forever home.
Right.
At the same time that those were the same homes that the starters, the
Right.
millennials were trying to purchase. Yeah.
They're competing for the same thing. So we shouldn't make assumptions, and we should probably find a way to better understand what that looks like.
I also think areas that have mixed use, and you know, too often I think we try to, in this zone, we're gonna do this, and in this zone, we'll allow this, and I just think there's a lot of strength to be gained by having mixed-use developments, not having, I just think
I agree.
it creates a healthier environment.
Yeah.
Yeah. You might have missed my lecture on Euclidean zoning, but yeah, I'll send you the link.
Or maybe I fell asleep during it, right?
I think I was so excited. Everybody else is like, "This guy's nuts."
My heart was
Anyway.
pounding.
I
Sorry.
would enjoy that as a planner. I would enjoy that. I just wanted to, you know, your new and revised city focus grant programs, and of course, all those are currently managed or administered for the most part through the redevelopment authority, and just better understanding the role or the lack thereof of the redevelopment authority in economic development, and is that a hurdle without some clear, I'm not quite sure I understand what the redevelopment authority's goals are. And if they're different than what is going to be recommended to council and council's decisions, that divergence could create some problems. And we don't want to create, you know, sort of policy problems where we have two different groups knocking against each other, but I think we want to better understand how those things fit, and if they don't fit, then their roles.
I echo that too, thinking that I've heard enough anecdotes about developers being confused about what regulatory body has complete say over how this goes, and it
Right.
turns into a hiccup.
Yeah. So is there, you know,
barrier.
logic in some consolidation to advance some of those goals, where you have one sort of clear body that's going to take on some of these challenges? And not just occasionally, but rigorously and aggressively help these goals come to life. And again, this fits with the strategic plan as well.
I'm curious about one of the current city focus grant programs, the housing demolition grant, that fund, and whether or not that can be expanded to apply to development of other properties other than single-family homes, thinking about multifamily homes, because as it is listed, I would only be able to use that funding if I were to tear down a home and replace a single-family home.
Good
And that's
point.
within 12 months, which we know right now is maybe not the most reasonable construction
Yeah.
timeline.
No.
So,
No.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of benefit to that program, but if it's expanded, it could be significantly more beneficial for the community in redeveloping some of those
Preparing the
properties.
parcels for market, I think, is really important, yeah, regardless of what's sitting on them now.
Yeah, one of the challenges that we've had is the private sector has never taken advantage of the single-family demo grant. And part of it is, it's difficult to buy a property for, even on low end, 75,000. Okay, now you get a $25,000 grant, but you bought a city lot for 75,000.
Yeah.
Essentially. And you can buy a 3/4 acre or half acre lot in the village of Plover for 55 to 65,000. And so we have community development has been the one who's been more proactive in acquisition, demolition, put up for sale. The church, unfortunately, is a good example on Strong's Avenue, where we had a developer that was interested. They wanted to pursue the single-family demo grant. Redevelopment Authority just wasn't comfortable with the offer that they had made. And we ended up sticking a bunch more money into it to tear it down and now just subdivide it and put it up for sale. We won't make money on it, but that's really not the purpose of city government or redevelopment authority.
Right.
It's to enhance the neighborhoods through redevelopment, not necessarily to make money off of lots. And that's something I think we've had a lot of conversations with that redevelopment authority is what is the purpose? Are we here to make money? Are we here to reinvest in our neighborhoods?
Because if we can, and I've had this discussion with a developer or builder, local builder, family-owned, if those lots are made available at $1, you now have reduced the overall cost of that home that's going to be built there, making it more affordable for middle class, upper working class, those type of things. So I think the role, again, that gets into the policies, I'm sorry, I'm gonna keep harping on policies, but again, in that economic development realm, what does that policy look like? Because if part of what we're looking at is affordability, if we can make the lot available and the sewer and water to that lot as part of our investment in the future, get them on the market, and now within 18 months, there's a house there paying property taxes.
And that'll pay off after the 30 years.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm glad that James is here, because one of the things is, are there ways for the city to encourage or expand programs through capital? You and I were talking a little bit before the meeting about, how can we apply, like the Live It Up WASA model, which, if you're not familiar, is essentially a $10,000 down payment assistance grant that companies partner with the city on, and they look at ways, and I've got to look more into it, but instead of saying 80% of CMI, are you looking at maybe what is the median income of Delta Dental or Skyward? And is there a way for us to provide that assistance because it's a city-focused program, not necessarily funded through the feds, but getting a little bit more creative to get more individuals, especially as wages are going up, to be eligible for programs. And that was one thing that I think would be really beneficial if we could, as part of the economic development goal, look at ways to encourage that more home ownership for folks who may not be at the upper echelon of some of our even white-collar positions in the city.
Right.
I'm thinking what that does then for people who want to be employed and would consider coming into this area, because
Right.
now there is a program and a process. Not only are you gonna get a job, but we have ways to help you get into your own housing. That would be huge.
And you said this is Wausau, right? In my experience, working for Marathon County and spending the last 15 years of my professional life in that area, the philanthropy in Wausau is really strong, particularly, and you know this, Ryan, those bigger industries, Liberty Mutual, Green Heck, Line Tech, Wausau Window and Walls, they see the benefit of creating that investment, and so it takes some work. I think we've got philanthropy here. We just have to create those pathways and,
I think there's many communities, not ours, but many communities where like caregivers can't afford to live there.
Right.
And reaching out to companies that employ caregivers with programs like this as part of marketing would be wonderful.
yeah.
you know, Inclusa would be a good example of.
Yes, absolutely.
One of the other things that I think this community should be really, really proud of is our Rent Ready
Yes.
program and its exceptional success rate over the last few years. But how do we look to expand that? I think, Tiffany, you had in your goals, you know, how do we look at the issue of homelessness and have a Rent Ready program that's more tailored towards homelessness? The beauty of it is we already have a successful program in place, and we have landlords that know it's a successful program and are willing to put their time, energy, and money into it. And so how do we expand Rent Ready to more than just those higher risk individuals?
It's gonna need some accompaniment, right? So working with folks who don't qualify for Rent Ready, right? But some of them, so there's that sense, what Rent Ready does, that would be great for other folks to have, is that sense of how to be a good renter, what does it even mean, how, what, you know, but it's gonna need accompaniment. It's gonna need folks walking with them, right? Because there's all these gaps. So there are gaps of people who might have a social worker from Inclusa, but, or they fall through, right? And so they're an adult, but so even folks with IDD community, they're an adult, right? So we just throw them to the wind. They're an adult. There you go. But there's not enough accompaniment, which is why, you know, parents, you know, they're not going to leave their home. Why would they? Because it's scarier than heck, right? There's a whole that we have in this community that fall in that gap. So something like Rent Ready that has this long-term piece to it, and I don't know exactly what it's all like. What I can identify is the need for it and the beauty of something like that would extend to a wider population, and help leverage those folks out of the ditches they're in and they've lived in almost their whole lives.
I would love to see the expansion of Rent Ready for sure. I know how many people it's helped house and how successful it's been. Extremely proud to have been on the launch team for that, because beginning to where it is now is really cool to see. I'd like to also see it expand its population of people that they're willing to help, because that is a limited population at this point, which is completely understandable for, you know, starting something off. But there are a lot of people that are not even eligible for that. So that would be really cool to see, to open the doors up a little bit further for that.
And for the IDD community, I think a successful program like that, looking at the unique needs and opening it up to that group would be wonderful.
Okay, so I've got essentially an objective would be to establish some type of economic development policy, and for this body and the council and the redevelopment authority better understand the relationship between the three. Updating program specifics and expansions, specifically Rent Ready, looking at like a Live It Up WASA model, and if there's programs that we could expand through CAP that go above and beyond the AMI, CMI component. And I will state, you know, we have some key players on this committee that, you know, I don't want this report to end up as a really nice paperweight. You know, so we have some movers and shakers who are going to be able to bring a lot of this to fruition on this committee.
Nothing worse than a plan that sits on a shelf.
Nobody wants a dust collector.
Nope.
And I did mention community engagement. You know, this is just a component that the city can utilize. Yeah, you know, coordinating neighborhood cleanups, doing a little bit more of that, I call it boots on the ground-esque neighborhood engagement with our neighborhood improvement coordinator and neighborhood improvement, or soon-to-be neighborhood planner as an example. One of the successes we've had as a community is the relationship with the Old Main Neighborhood Association, working through some of the challenges that they've had living surrounded by student housing, bridging that gap, encouraging the neighborhood association to, they used to have a block party. I think they're going to try to get that going again this year or this fall, and being successful there. But there are other ways to look at the neighborhood fabric, look at housing, and encourage people to really start identifying with the place and making it an area that they want to invest their time, energy, and money into. What else, or what are other ways that we can engage the community for housing projects?
So one of the things, and I thought about this when we were working on the strategic plan, and then it really came to bear when we were having the very first discussions on ADUs, and that kind of blew up into chaos, is what we were hearing, just a little bit, and we hear it on Business 51 too, is nobody lets us know anything. And we all know there's a lot of ways to find out things. But I thought one way, because we all have neighbors, there's always one or two neighbors that know everything that's going on in the neighborhood. And either they have the time to do that and they're bored, or they truly care about their neighbors and their neighborhood, or a combination of both, is sort of that neighborhood outreach person that works directly with the neighborhood improvement coordinator to get those messages out. Because like in the League of Women Voters, we do phone trees. And so when there's an event, one person calls the next person. So could we utilize that neighbor who is always looking for ways to help, maybe not so constructively sometimes, but give them an opportunity to find construction within that, so.
A lot of the engagement too, I also see as considering what the assets that we have in this community with, college students and forestry department and natural resources generally on campus, and then also church groups and many other groups where there is a collective of people that are volunteering substantial amount of time to make something happen. I think of also like the Giving Gardens and the plant sale at Farm Shed, where there's so many plants. And those are opportunities where people are volunteering and have so many skills that could translate to individual households. And so I don't know if that's something that can be captured somehow in the community resources, the annual community resources booklet, or just with Mark and the role of the neighborhood development coordinator, that can be that, like Melissa's saying, a phone tree or a spot where people know to go and to have help when they need it.
So, maybe this is just a crazy thought, but faith communities are meant to be neighbors. And as somebody of the institutional church, I will say, they've done their own good work at shooting themselves in the foot and becoming isolated and taking themselves out of the center of community, because that's just the reality. Church is not at the center of community. So how do we reknit that back in, right? How do we ask faith communities to consider that, right? Because there's going to have to be some letting go on their part, but how can we recreate that? For example, our church building is in the Bannock area, but a lot of our folks don't necessarily come from that area, and there's a whole lot of disconnection, right? Whereas that's the opposite of what it used to be, right?
Yeah.
Churches that go by parishes, they're literally called that.
They're parishes.
And they were a community center for the parish, right? Like, I get that, and nor should you need to be a member of the community that's in the area that you live in, but how do we create that neighborly engagement again and call that forward? Because that could be a strength, right? Instead of just this kind of thing over here.
Yeah, one of the things that we see when we, just we're talking about our comprehensive plan, which is going to start kicking off, and based on the strategic plan, it's going to be really neighborhood area focused, and it's really interesting. You look at specific areas. I'll provide like the Washington school neighborhood. Nobody. You find these neighborhood nucleuses, right? And whether it's a church or an elementary school, something that everybody can rally behind. I think you brought up a really good point that, for the longest time, now I'm blanking on the church name, corner of 4th and
St. Pete's.
St. Pete's.
Yeah.
Like that was the St. Pete's neighborhood, and over time, it's not necessarily referred to. It's not the nucleus of that neighborhood anymore. Instead, you have like the co-op, which serves as the kind of the nucleus in that area. So, how do you engage other areas or other organizations to go back into the community and do things, whether they're faith-based or nonprofit?
Yeah, I think we've seen like a pretty strong dichotomy. I think speaking of as like someone from Create, as we've tried to support groups through different social spaces and trying to think about neighborhood mapping and figuring out how we build identity around neighborhoods, we're seeing a really strong pull for people to really be focused on those social activities in those spaces. Like they are finding their communities within those spaces rather than within their physical boundaries. It's really easy to leave those physical boundaries and go somewhere else. And when we think about how other communities are continuing to grow their networking, make sure that people feel welcome within a space, it's because of consistent, recurring social experiences, and that needs to be at the groundwork for this. And I'm thinking about neighborhood meetings when new housing is proposed. If neighborhood meetings existed already, you have more success about discussing new housing projects and development. But again, like the format of that is going to be extremely important. And I might be sharing an example that I might need to send you all a link to later, but the founders of November Project, a free fitness movement, talk about what it's like to develop a community and a movement, how to really found that and start that. And those components are like special sauce. Like what is the energy you are bringing to the table is very important in those spaces. And finding the social community groups within those neighborhoods who are bringing that energy that is attractive and enjoyable and makes you feel like that you belong there, going to be a difficult thing to do, but I think it's the primary thing that needs to be done for those districts.
It's not impossible. It starts with people talking to one another, because we did it with the Friends of Emerson Park. And in that, we built on with the Old Main Neighborhood Association, but also St. Joe's Catholic Church and St. Paul's Lutheran Church. And we're now part of this big network, so when St. Paul's doing something, they're including the Friends, which includes the neighborhood. So, but it's taken, oh gosh, how long have we been working on it? About 4 years. And now St. Joe's is to the point where they are reaching out to us and saying, how can we collaborate? And we in turn, so when we see them walking down the street, it takes time and it takes conversations and that special sauce of why are we so special and all working together.
One of the things, when we were coming through this accessory dwelling unit debacle of 2021, and the direction that the city council gave community development staff was go out into the neighborhoods and have these conversations.
And we did.
And we did. And I will say, and I've said this at these meetings, government sucks at communication. And you get this letter in the mail, which is this terrible template that is so rigid and tells you this is what's going on. Show up to this meeting. You walk into this room and you've got 7 or 9 people up in front. Okay, now go stand at the podium and talk to us. It's not an inviting environment for actual constructive conversation. So this is how it relates a little bit into the zoning aspect where, okay, you make a lot of things more permitted. You cut the red tape conditional use permit stuff down. But instead of mandating a public hearing for a conditional use permit, no, you have to go out and you have to have a neighborhood meeting and you've got to, explain that, this is a permitted use, but what can we do to make this a better product for your neighborhood? And I think that's, all said and done, the ADU as a good example, the product that will be going to public hearing in a few weeks here, I think is better. Is it exactly as an urban planner's dream as I would have hoped it to be? No. But I think it was better done for the neighborhoods and protecting those neighborhoods and addressing those concerns. And that's how we built that consensus for that specific proposal. And as you go through and have these large development or redevelopments, maybe that's the better way to engage the neighborhood as opposed to conditional use permits and standing up for 3 minutes and then not understanding how Robert's Rules of Orders works.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's really uncomfortable.
That doesn't build relationships or community.
yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I just one looking at your list that you've preloaded here. Just one example of a community that does coordinate like a neighborhood cleanup. I'm thinking about maybe not like a neighbor cleanup, but a neighborhood city-wide strategy for bringing civic-minded folks out. The City of Eau Claire and their Parks Department launches a spring clean where it's all coordinated by the Parks Department, coordinates a group of people to go and clean up certain parts of town. And that might be a good way to bring together civic-minded people who are wanting to give back that volunteerism.
We can see even, identifying a few places within a neighborhood, we all know them, where a place needs a little bit of pickup because they've left so much stuff laying around and now they have a stroke or broke a leg and they may be reluctant to receive help, but presented in the right way, it could be neighbors helping neighbors, clean up a bunch of trash in the backyard.
I think this goal or this objective is one that we can continue to massage over and come up with specifics, but definitely neighborhood outreach and working with like the faith communities or those nucleus as part of that should be part of the recommendations. So I know everyone's falling apart here.
Yep.
We're headed out. So essentially, I'll just keep going forward. Like I said, we're going to take this information, put it in a report, have some actual data behind the recommendations that we make, because that's an important part of it, and bring it back for review during the next meeting. We'll also look at goal number 2, and then just as an FYI, the very preliminary report is coming together, and we'll start bringing the actual draft document in front of you as we move forward. So we are right on our timeline that we had a little bit internally, and we will have something, by fall, hopefully to present to council. So
I don't know if you should use the word equity, it's going to cause problems. Sorry.
thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. And with that, I think we can be adjourned.
Indeed, thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.